feature your business with a full or half-page ad in an upcoming issue of Vision and Purpose Lifestyle Magazine. Advertise your business, book, or event and reach potential clients. Vision and Purpose Lifestyle Magazine covers and features stories in business and entrepreneurship, education, performing arts, sports, community outreach, fashion, travel and real estate, health and wellness, and more. Contact us at info@vnpmagazine.com, or you can reach out to our Director of Sales, Ms. Karen McConnell-Jones, at 202-904-1000. Vision and Purpose, inspiring our community.
And welcome back. We are here at the Village Talk Couch on the Village Talk podcast. And today, my co-host, Cortland Jones, how you doing?
Hey.
Hey, we are here. We are so excited to have Eugene Jones with us, brother of Cortland Jones, civil servant, man of God. He is one who we are just excited to hear what we're calling a Black male's perspective. And in Cortland already, you kind of warmed us up before the break about some things that we're going to be talking about. So go ahead and jump in. I'm excited to hear a little bit more about where we're going with some of Eugene's views when we talk about Black Lives Matter and then living in a white world as a Black man.
Yeah, so Eugene, I'm going to need you to bear with me because I want to try to make sure we get as much from you in this rich experience that you have as a community leader, which you did mention. What I want to open with is explaining to everybody, as a child growing up, when we lived in Belfort Towers, I was late elementary, middle school, and I always remember my brother being angry, but I could not understand why. We didn't have the privilege of growing up together. So in the instances that we did have encounter with one another, I always sensed him being angry. What I would like for Eugene to do is to take us back from your perspective, Eugene, because you were born in 61, I was born in 68. I was born at the end of the civil rights movement, but you lived in it. And then I realize now the songs by Marvin Gaye, What's Going On, the songs by Stevie Wonder, songs in the key of life, those songs were really about the Great Migration, the time period where African Americans were leaving the South to move to the North, and with the hopes of something better, but it wasn't always that way. And so now I have a better idea of why you were angry. But for a moment, if you could briefly just touch on, help us understand Eugene at that time period.
Okay, well, as a young person growing up, I witnessed as much as I could as a child the effects of the death of Martin Luther King and the effects on the community. I was walking with my mother. We were going to the store, it appears, in my memory. And when we got to the top of the street where the stores were, there were stores that were burned out. They weren't on fire at the time, but they were burned out. And I asked my mother, why were the stores burned out? And she said, because Martin Luther King had been killed, and people responded the way that they did. And that word, the name Martin Luther King, stuck in my head as a child. And I knew that he was different in some way, while I had never seen him or interacted with him. But I knew he had to be different because people responded to his death in the way that I had not experienced in anybody's death. I didn't know anyone who had an impact on the community through their death. And so I began to sense that there were things going on in the community that I needed to be more aware of. And I think words can't always express the pressures or the energy that comes toward us. Sometimes we can just be aware that something is strange or different. And those times, as I became older, molded me and brought to my awareness, I was able to see these forces that were coming against African Americans. And especially when I gave my life to Christ at 15 years old, I was always reminded that in much wisdom is much vexation, and he who increases in knowledge increases in sorrows. So my outlook became a lot more gloomy as I foresaw or believed that that the end of the world was near, and that all of the things that I was seeing was just leading to that. And I'm kind of shocked that I'm still here now at 58 years old, thinking that Jesus was coming back at any moment. And as time went on, I began to contemplate and ask God many questions about what the purpose of this life was. Why was it still going on? If it had such misery and such sorrow in the world, then why didn't he just end this? And God began to explain to me that he was a little smarter than I was, and that I needed to rely on him, not to rely on my own insight or try to figure out what he was doing, that his ways were higher than my ways and his thoughts were higher than my thoughts. And so I had to learn how to calm down. It took me a long time to calm down, because God always asked me, was I smarter? Or if I were God, would the world be a better place? And I was like most of the men in the Bible who talked to God and had to excuse themselves from their ability to analyze God and just kind of take in, what kind of God we have. And he just let me know that I needed to humble myself like a child, or I would never enter the kingdom of heaven. So I decided that it was important for me to just take God's hand as a child, or follow him as a sheep, and just accept the things that came into my life, and that he would help me with the big stuff when I needed it.
So in response to that, the image of the store burnt down, you mentioned in conversation previous that somehow this played a role. Could you tell me real briefly how that image of the store burning down impacted your transition into the fire service?
When I went for my fire service interview in 1983, this overwhelming sense that African Americans were very upset during the Reagan years, that the suffering had continued, and in their view, as they communicated, changes were not as forthcoming as we thought they were, let alone comparing it to the King era. I was asked a question like, what was the relevance of the fire department in 1983, or actually it was 2 years before, it was in 81, because I got hired in 83. I had to wait 2 years to get the job. And I felt like the frustration that African Americans felt in the community was so great that if the trickle-down economics of Reagan didn't work, that African Americans would begin to riot as they did back in the 60s, and that the fire department would be there to respond to the upheaval in the community. And those who interviewed me were shocked at my answer, and but they still hired me because in my view, in the world that I live in, what was important was the views of African Americans. I couldn't transition to what was happening in the world from a view of other races. All I knew was the view of the people that were directly around me. I grew up in Washington, D.C., Chocolate City, 60 to 80% African American, and those are the voices that I heard all the time. So that helped shape my view of me having a role in the community as I was exposed to the community more and more through my job.
And in that experience, obviously, I know the story, others don't. But I'm going to ask you if you could share briefly, what did you learn most? African-American male, as an African-American male coming into this environment that was predominantly white at that time, what was your biggest challenge? Because obviously you weren't just content with being a firefighter. So if you could, in a sentence or two, tell us what the biggest challenge was in rising through the ranks.
Yeah, so being in the fire service and seeing that it was a performance-based system, that my rise totally related to what I did. There wasn't in the beginning ranks, sergeant, lieutenant, captain. It was how I performed on the test. If I passed the test, I would be eligible, and the higher I scored meant that I had a greater opportunity to be in the leadership of the department. And I felt that at that time, there was no one who was going to be able to protect my life in an emergency situation than me. I was not willing to let my life be in the hands of another individual, that if we were going to go into dangerous situations, that I was going to be the one calling the shots to make sure I made it home to my family every day. And so the difference for me that I saw between white males and black males was the level of confidence that white males exhibited every day. They believed that the world evolved around them, that they were the one. When they got on the scene, they would communicate in a way that I hadn't heard before, that yes, I am on the scene. I see all of this devastation and all of these things occurring, and I'm here now. And I hadn't heard that kind of talk before, that the mere presence of an individual could change the direction of an incident. And so I had to switch over from my limited view of myself and switch to unwavering confidence in what my abilities were. And as I absorbed the information and knew what I needed to do, I knew I had to be the best. The fire department requires you to be at your best, and anybody who is not at their best is going to get left behind in the rank structure.
And for those who don't know, my brother not only ascended to becoming the fire chief in the county, but he served as fire chief for two different fire departments. So would you say this learning of the need for confidence is what propelled you in your aspiration to finally, be in that seat? Was that like the determining factor, or was there something else?
I think that God was showing me that my confidence, that it was internal. My struggle was internal. It wasn't that the white man was holding me back, or there was some obstacle in my way or anything like that. I needed to be the best prepared. And I just happened to be in a car listening to the radio when the first Black fire chief of New York City was being interviewed. And he was asked, how did he get to the top of the largest fire department in the world? How did he get there? And he said, because he knew the policies and procedures better than anybody in New York City. And I said that is what I'm going to do then. If that's how he made it to the top, that I would memorize every policy, procedure, and code or law related to the fire department. And I think I achieved that and was able to ascend to the top of the fire department in two different jurisdictions, because it was just my aim to be the absolute best there was in the agency. And I believe that there was no one